Hello and welcome back to Frogboy X1 Gaming. I'm Andrew, and today we're going to talk about the most played PlayStation game on the market today. So if you like this content, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and let's get started with this. So, I decided to kind of quit playing games for a minute and jump over on Twitter to see what was going on over there. And believe it or not, the PlayStation guys are playing a game called Let's Take Blurry Pictures of Halo Infinite footage and compare it to pictures of like God of War and stuff. So I was like, wow, man, that is a freaking interesting game, man. I can't imagine just how freaking good that game is to play. Seeing as a whole bunch of wonderful Halo news came out today talking about just how great the game is and showing us footage of just how amazing this game looks, running at 4K 60, not 4K 30, of course. So, my gosh, man. So what do? They jump right on there and they start playing that new game, that Twitter PlayStation 5 game of the year. Like, that's a pretty freaking good game, I guess. So, let's talk about this for a minute. I've been a PlayStation guy for over 25 years. Like, I love my PlayStation. But there comes a time when the stuff just gets so ridiculous and so dumb that you kind of got to scratch your head. Like, I mean, Halo Infinite runs at 4K 60 frames a second, and this game looks really clean. You look at the Halo multiplayer right now, it looks pretty freaking good, and the gameplay is super smooth. When it comes down to it, yeah, PlayStation 5 games, they look freaking amazing. They look good, but they run at 30 frames a second. 30 frames a second. Let that sink in. I mean, that's borderline unplayable now. I know. A year ago, I was playing 30 frames a second games. That all changed exactly a year ago when I started playing games at 60 frames a second on my Xbox Series X. 30 frames is last generation. So in order for me to even take them seriously with a PlayStation 5 game, comparing it to any Xbox game going forward, that game has to run at 60 frames a second. At 60 frames a second. I will compare the 60 frames a second mode to the Xbox mode at 60 frames a second. I mean, we'll see which one comes out on top. I mean, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart looked pretty good at 60 frames a second. Like, it looked good. But Halo looks better than Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart at 60 frames a second. There's no doubt about that. If they're going to keep continuing to, like, diminish the good things that Xbox are doing, I'm going to keep calling them out. I'm going to keep, pointing out things like, yeah, those games look good at 30 frames a second. They really do. Yeah, they're great. Would I play them at 30 frames a second? No. It is so tough for me, so hard for me to try to play Demon's Souls at 30 frames a second. It's just not doable anymore. After playing for so long now on Xbox Series X at 60 frames a second, man, it's so hard to go back. It's just too jarring. You have to start the day playing at 30 frames a second for it to even be somewhat palatable. I mean, I struggled on the struggle bus for 20-something plus hours with Guardians of the Galaxy because there was no way I was playing that game at 1080p. No way I was gonna give up that much resolution to play that game at 1080p. Now playing it at 1440p with the ray tracing on, yeah, that's fine, but it's still 30 frames a second. And that game was held back on Xbox because of the PlayStation 5 couldn't do it any better than 1080p at 60 frames a second. So if we're going to play the whole look at God of War versus look at Halo, a game that literally runs at 4K 60 frames a second and 120 frames a second in the performance mode, come on, guys. Come on, man. Yeah, your PlayStation games look great, but they're literally borderline unplayable at 30 frames a second. So, going forward, if we're going to compare those games, we're going to compare them on level playing ground. We're going to compare the 60 frames a second mode. When Horizon Forbidden West comes out, please don't let that game be 1080p, because if that game launches at 1080p at 30 frames or 60 frames a second, I'm going to be pretty freaking disappointed. Pretty disappointed. I'm expecting higher resolutions on that game. Even if they're checkerboarded, like I don't care. I just want higher resolution. Like 1080p is unacceptable for these consoles. It really is. I don't care if it. I mean, maybe at 120 frames a second, like dropping down to 1080p. That I'm okay with. That is okay. I feel like that is okay. You got WRC10 that drops to 1080p at 120 frames a second. Even Dirt 5 drops to what 1440p. But I mean, you got Doom Eternal that runs at 1800p with either ray tracing at 60 or 1800p at 120 frames, and it runs at like 16 on the PlayStation. So if we're really going to get into this, guys, and compare these games going forward, yeah, dude, I want to see these games running at 60 frames a second. I mean, like God of War running at 60 frames a second on the PlayStation 5. That there is a decent comparable game to Halo. Does God of War beat that? I would say I think that one's going to probably be the closest. I mean, Halo is a completely different game with a completely different art style. Just like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is a completely different game with a completely different art style to something like Forza Horizon 5 that looks more realistic, where Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart looks like a kid game. I would say Ratchet and Clank visuals are closer to Halo Infinite in terms of like material wise. But I mean, I'm just going off of what I've seen, what I can actually physically see on my console native in the multiplayer mode. The campaign will always look better because it's the one that they're going to put all the art into. That's the one that is easier to be able to cram all that, that goodness in there. Whereas the multiplayer mode usually always takes a pretty decent hit when it comes to visuals. So if we're going to be comparing, we're comparing 60 frames a second modes. That's what we're comparing going forward. And if they want to bring God of War as the standard bearer into the next generation, yeah, definitely use the PlayStation 5 version and let's go forward with that. Let's see, because technically Halo Infinite is a cross-generation game, so I feel like that's okay to to compare God of War to it or whatever. I mean, even Horizon Forbidden West, definitely comparable. The new God of War Ragnarok, whatever. I mean, those are definitely comparable. But yeah, let's compare the 60 frames a second mode, not the 30 frames a second mode, if we're going to go forward with that. But other than that, yeah, let's continue to talk about their little Twitter game that they're going to be playing until February. It's going to get hectic out there, guys. It is. Like, I do feel bad for the PlayStation side because, yeah, dude, they really don't have anything. And their two standard bearers are Call of Duty and Battlefield. And I reviewed both of those, and yeah, you probably better save your money. Battlefield 2042 is definitely an empty shell right now. I mean, yeah, it'll get fixed and it'll get stuff added to it. But, I mean, that's going to take some months. It's going to take a little bit of time for that to actually start. I mean, they're usually like a month or two behind on those after they launch them. And Call of Duty, whoa, man. Yeah, dude, they can have their Call of Duty all they want. Everything else, I mean, yeah, that's just the thing. The PlayStation guys don't go out and buy these games. They claim that, oh, yeah, well, they sell more on the PlayStation and whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, why aren't you guys playing these games? Why are you sitting at home on Twitter? You know what I mean? Like, I don't get it. But then again, we're on Twitter too. We're all on Twitter. Obviously, I'm there playing around, talking to people. I usually just post my stuff on there, and then, when I see those comments and stuff, because it's not hard to see. I mean, you just scroll a little bit, and boom, there they are. So, yeah, Twitter PS5 edition is definitely going to be the #1 played game this holiday season. So if you like this content, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.